Is this working right now? Oh, so stupid, dude. Oh my God. They changed. Okay, I think I know what happened. Are we good? Are we? Oh, we on now? What's the dealio here? Dude, they changed their interface, and I didn't realize there was a button now that you have to press to go live. Before, if I just started, if I just started the stream on my streaming software on my computer, YouTube would automatically start streaming. But now there's a button, and it was hiding, and I couldn't see it. My window was too small. YouTube always has to change stuff. Just leave it the same, man. It was working. Okay. Now we are good, I believe. Okay, sorry for that little bit of a 15-minute delay there. That was all me not seeing a button that I needed to press. Cool. All right, looks like we got a lot of people in the chat, so Mr. Chang, thank you for keeping them entertained. Well, I've figured out my technical difficulties over here. Emilian, nice to see you. Akash in the chat. Josita. Ethan, hey there. Wow. Sorry about that delay. I think we got it figured out. It took me about 15 minutes to get used to the new layout. But we good. I'm good, Mr. Chang. I'm really good. You know? I'm really good. Everything has been going pretty well. Finals coming up rather, which is easy for me as a teacher. I'm pretty close to being all wrapped up with getting everything ready. So I think once this week is over, it's kind of more of an easy street for teachers. I mean, especially for me, since my finals are multiple choice, don't have to do too much grading, right? I feel bad for teachers who have like final essays that they have to read through. Yeah, I'm not really. That's pretty rough. For me, I just throw out a little MC, Scantron style. Not too bad. So I'm good. Hope you guys are doing well too. What's up, Dylan? Already here's your you're the first question on the final review stream. So this final review stream is for finals. And if anyone from APES ends up watching, they can ask any questions about Unit 5 stuff. So Dylan, you're asking what's the difference between covalent, ionic, and hydrogen bonds? Just the thing you want to remember with the difference between them is that, and that's something you can Google too, to be honest. Like you can Google the different bonds and what their features are. But for our class, the thing is to remember that hydrogen bonds are what we look at as important bonds when we talk about transpiration and how water is moving up the xylem, because hydrogen bonds cause water to stick to itself, causes that cohesion. So hydrogen bonds form between water molecules. That's where we see them most when we're talking about biology. The other kinds of bonds, covalent bonds, are the ones that you typically find in most of the molecules that we deal with in bio. They're stronger than the hydrogen bonds, so just remember that they're stronger than that. And ionic bonds, don't worry too much about those. I'm not going to ask you much question about bonding on the final. Emilian, remember we did JP, which gave the blood type of a baby and the blood type of a mother. The question was, what's the blood type of the father? Can I explain that? I don't remember exactly what I wrote. To be honest, I don't remember what I wrote. So, I mean, I would say if you're trying to figure out mother and father of a baby with blood types, you just want to walk through it in more of a logical way. You can use Punnett squares if that helps you, but I kind of walk through it in a logical way. Let me pull something up here that might help us actually. Let me pull it up over here. Actually, it's over here. So let's do a. So we'll pull up like a blank doc here. So let's say you have a mother who's A positive, right? Mother's A positive. Is that something you guys can see? Let me bump up the font here to like 24. So let's say you have a mother who's A positive, right? So this is the mother. And then you have a baby who is B negative. The question is, and then the father is let's just say O positive. So the question is, can this father actually be the biological father of this baby? And the way I think about this is I go, okay, the baby is B negative, which means that the baby can be either B negative negative, or BO negative negative. That's the possibilities. The mother's possibilities. I always just look at the possibilities. Mother could be A positive positive, A positive negative, AO positive positive, or AO positive negative. So those are the possibilities. And the father, since he's blood type O positive, he can be OO positive positive or OO positive negative. So those are our possibilities. So the question is could this be the father of this baby? Well, this baby is actually this example, this baby cannot be the child of either of these two because it has a B, right? So this baby would need to have got, so let's say the mother is AB. So then this would change her possible, this would be a B, a B, and a B, right? So it's clear to me in this case that this is the mother, right? This is the baby. The baby got its B from its mom because the mom could not, the baby does not have an A allele, so there's no way the A came from the mom, right? The baby is negative negative, so clearly the mom has to be AB. Clearly the mom has to be AB negative. So the mom gave the B, this B to the baby, and this negative to the baby. Now, the question is, could this be the father of this baby? Now the question is, if it got a B and a negative from the mother, is it possible for the father to give something to the baby that would be possible? And the answer to this is yes, because the baby could get an O and a negative from the father, because the father could be, this could be the genotype of the father, and the father could give an O and it's negative to the baby, the mother gives the B and the negative, and that creates this genotype. So that's possible. So you just have to like logic your way through it. Make sense? So that's just an example. Hax whale, yes, there's 94 questions. Thanks, Maggie. There's 94 questions on the final. Catherine, would I be able to run through some of the main points about urbanization since you didn't lecture on it? Yeah. So the key points about urbanization are, and I didn't go over this. I went over the, let me pull this up actually. Close that. So the things to remember for urbanization that's going to help you tomorrow on the quiz are based off of the last sheet of the urbanization and Symbiocity Google Classroom assignment. So I'll pull that up really quickly. Okay. So this assignment, if you go down to these questions here. So Catherine, these are the questions that you want to kind of focus on. So number one, right here, describe the effects of urbanization on the hydrologic, aka the water cycle, and the carbon cycle. So when I was talking about this, the idea was with the hydrologic cycle, what you want to think about is like when we build cities, they use a lot of water, so they can extract a lot of water from aquifers. So if I was answering this question, let's blow this up a little bit. I might say something like, large cities deplete aquifers via withdrawing large quantities of water. So that's one example. Let me put that in red so it stands out a little more. Right, so that might be one thing I might say. I would also mention something like if the aquifer is next to the coast, can cause salt water intrusion. Right, so what that means is when you extract water from an aquifer and it's next to the coast, when you pull water out of the aquifer, fresh water out, and the aquifer is next to the coast, sometimes salt water can intrude or seep into the aquifer and mix with the fresh water in there and basically ruin the aquifer and create like an aquifer situation that's very salty in terms of its amount of water. And so that aquifer can become useless for irrigation or for drinking. So saltwater intrusion is a real issue with aquifers next to the coast, especially if there's too much withdrawal of water and not enough recharge. So that's the other thing I would say. Lack of recharge of aquifers with precipitation. So, and this is due to impervious surfaces that create a lot of runoff of water and allow for less percolation and infiltration into the ground. So basically the idea is that because the city is completely paved with roads and covered with buildings, there's not much area for water when it rains to seep into the soil, percolate down and recharge that underground water, that aquifer, and fill it back up. Instead, the water runs off and goes into streams and then ends up in the ocean or in nearby the bodies of water, and that just causes an even worse problem with the aquifer depletion, right? So that's kind of what I would get at with that. With the carbon cycle, what you're looking at here is basically with urbanization, you have a lot of carbon emissions due to transportation and factory and industry, burning fossil fuels, releasing CO2. And then you also have like landfills. So basically you have two things. You have burning of fossil fuels that's a typo. So you have like burning of fossil fuels with transportation, and industry, which adds more CO2 to the atmosphere. And then you have landfills, which accumulate waste that decomposes and releases methane into the atmosphere, both of which cause an increase of carbon in the atmosphere. So the carbon cycle is basically affected by urbanization puts more carbon into the atmosphere. So that's the key for the carbon cycle. And then the other thing you should remember is urban sprawl. So urban sprawl is this idea that when a city builds out, it sort of spreads out over a larger area. And again, it exacerbates or makes worse some of the stuff we talked about up here with the water cycle, right? Because now you have more land being covered by streets and roads and buildings, so you have less water getting into the ground and recharging the aquifers. So urban sprawl is that idea of you have the main urban environment, right? Like the city, like let's say something like San Francisco or let's say San Jose. That's the downtown area in San Jose is considered the urban area. And then out of that, you have the sprawl of suburban areas that we live in, like Cupertino. And then finally, you should know some methods. This last question here lists at least 3 methods that can be implemented in urban environments to reduce runoff. So for this one, I would say one would be use more permeable concretes that allow water to seep into the ground. So instead of using impermeable concretes, use different kinds of concrete that allow water to seep through it. Another one would be build up, not out, i.e. reduce urban sprawl. So build buildings taller to fit people in a smaller area rather than spreading out. You would just cover less land and reduce all those other issues. And the last one could be create green spaces like parks, green roofs or preserves, right? And all doing that is going to allow you to actually have places in the city that can increase water recharging in the ground and not have as much runoff. So these are some methods to prevent excess runoff. Okay, hopefully that answered your question, Catherine. Eileen, do we need to know determining sex? I'm not sure if we did. I thought it's 50-50. Yeah, sex is determined as 50-50. Depends on if it's XY or XX, and it's a 50-50% chance. It's a 50% chance that you get a Y chromosome from the sperm, because remember the sperm is either going to have a Y or an X from the father, and 50-50 chance which one is used to fertilize the egg. So your chances of having male or female in terms of the sex of the offspring is 50-50. Maggie, just wondering, did we go through triglycerides? Maggie, triglycerides is just a kind of fat. It's a kind of lipid that you typically see from your diet that you would eat, and it's found in foods. It's also an important type of lipid in the body. Just know that it's another form of lipid that exists, just like we have phospholipids, which make up the cell membrane. Triglycerides are another kind of lipid that we usually use as a way of storing energy, rather than like phospholipid. Its purpose is not necessarily to store energy, but it's to make the cell membrane. So it's just a different kind of lipid. Kyle, what is up for the aligned packet? Is there an answer key so we can check our answers for Unit 5? I don't have an answer key for that packet. If you have a specific question about one that you're not sure about, feel free to let me know. So, yeah, guys, that last explanation about urbanization was for apes. It's not for bio. Emilian, yes, there is a key for that packet. I will post for that packet. I will post that later on Google Classroom. So there will be a key for that. No problem, Catherine. I hope that helped. Hey, Nyanika. Nice to see you. I'm doing well. I am doing well. I hope you're doing well too. It's been a while. Kyle, so we have to know the rock cycle layers of soil. For Unit 5, for the Unit 5 test, you do not need to know layers of soil. For the final, you do, but not for the Unit 5 test. Because the Unit 5 test is, Unit 5 did not include soil. That was in Unit 4. As far as the rock cycle, you should know the rock cycle for the Unit 5 test, because the rock cycle is related to mineral formation, and we talked about minerals and mining. So you should have a general idea of the rock cycle. And as far as like what you should know about the rock cycle, really, if you understand just sort of the basics. Wow, that is just a poor image. Wait, why did it look bad? If I click view image, it turns it into like a really low quality image, even though it's good here. So you should just kind of know that there's 3 types of rock: metamorphic, igneous, and sedimentary. And you should know that the way that they're formed, that they're interchangeable with each other, and that sedimentary rock is formed through this process of weathering and erosion of metamorphic and igneous rock. And sedimentary rock is sort of like your least strong rock, the most brittle, and it's basically the youngest, the most new rock, so to speak, that's formed. And then over time, that sedimentary rock, as it gets heated and pressurized, turns into metamorphic rock, which can then melt, turn into igneous rock, and these are a little bit stronger, harder rocks. So, yeah, so you should know the rock cycle, just in its basic sense. Nerea, can I view the man-made water cycle? So the man-made water cycle. So the man-made water cycle, like the whole thing, is there any part in particular that you are worried about or trying to figure out? Because remember, the man-made water cycle is essentially how water gets to your house and how it's taken away. So, like, you should know that water comes from 2 places, right? Water that we drink and use for irrigation comes from 2 places. One, from melting snow and glaciers, and the other from aquifers, which are underground sources of water. So the melting snow and glaciers, usually the way that works is the glaciers melt and the snow melts in the mountains. It runs down the mountains and eventually it forms rivers, right? And what we can do is we can put a dam on a river, and that backs up that water, and we create a reservoir of a water source. And then we take that water from the reservoir and we send it to a water treatment plant through some aqueducts, which are these channels that transport water. And the water treatment plant cleans and purifies the water and then sends it to the houses for use. Right? And then the houses use the water. That water then becomes wastewater, right? Once it's used for cooking, cleaning, showering, etc., washing. That water is then essentially like that water is then emitted from the house through what we call the sewage system. So any water that's used in the house goes into the sewage system. The sewage system carries that water to a wastewater treatment plant where it's cleaned, it's filtered, removed, all the sludge and stuff is removed from the water. That stuff's sent to a landfill. The purified clean water is ejected out of the wastewater treatment plant and it ends up in a nearby river or ocean where it goes back into the natural water cycle. The other part of the man-made water cycle is what we call runoff from the streets. So water that lands on the streets or on buildings and is not, usually precipitation, is not part of the sewage system, and it goes into the storm drains on the streets. Those storm drains take that water and they put it directly into the river or the ocean. So it skips the wastewater treatment plant. So it's not treated, it's not cleaned, and a lot of times it has non-point source pollution in it, like oils and soaps and things that it picks up from the street, trash and litter, so it can be kind of damaging to the environment. So those are the main features. Those are the main, I would say the main features. One other thing about the man-made water cycle is this idea of the percolation ponds, which is basically a way for us to recharge the aquifers. So the underground water we can extract using wells, and it goes through the same process as reservoir water. It's sent to a water treatment plant, treated, sent to the houses where it's used, and then eventually emitted to a wastewater treatment plant. But that underground water needs to be recharged, and in cities where it doesn't get recharged very well because there's a lot of impervious surfaces like concrete and buildings, and the water runs off, instead of seeping into the ground and recharging it, we can build percolation ponds, which is a man-made pond that catches rainwater that allows it to seep into the ground and recharge the aquifer. So that's another way that we can manipulate the water cycle. Hopefully that made sense. What do we got here? A million, wait for the final. Will we have to know specific enzymes? No, you will not need to know specific enzymes. The only specific things you need to know are things like glucose, starch, glycogen. Know those ones because those are like important for storing energy, and those are important in things like cellular respiration. But you don't need to know specific enzymes. I would give you, if I'm going to talk to you about enzymes, I'll give you the name and the function of the enzyme, but you should know like how they work, obviously. Catherine, can we go over parts of the leaf? Sure, I'll do that. Kyle, just to answer your question real quick about river channelization, don't worry too much about that. We didn't really talk much about it, but it's just a way to prevent flooding when you have a huge influx of water, maybe during a giant rainstorm and you have a lot of runoff from the cities, or just a lot of runoff in general from the rain, and rivers can overflow and cause flooding. So a river channelization is basically when you dig and you deepen and widen a river so that it can hold more water so it doesn't flood. Doesn't flood, and it also prevents erosion of the riverbanks and things like that. So it's just sort of a technique of preventing erosion and flooding by sort of digging up and deepening and widening rivers. So Catherine, can I go over the parts of the leaf? Yeah, let's take a look. Let us take a look. These, as far as I'm concerned, the parts of the leaf that you need to know is almost every part, actually. So if you look at this cross section here of this leaf, you should know all of the parts. You should know that but the most important parts to know, the most important parts are the top layer of cells here, called the Palisade cells, these longer cells. This is where you have most of your chloroplasts doing most of the photosynthesis, and they're at the top of the leaf because that's where the light hits, and you need light to do photosynthesis, right? That's where the light's striking. Then in the bottom layer, you have what's called the mesophyll, or excuse me, the spongy cells. And these spongy cells, it's called spongy because there's more air between the cells and they're spread out. And this is because on the bottom of the leaf is where you have the stomata, or the stoma, which is an opening that allows carbon dioxide into the leaf and water and oxygen out of the leaf. And so you need space, you need air space for that gas to come in and out. And so it's less compact at the bottom of the leaf. So you need to know the spongy mesophyll cells, the Palisade mesophyll cells. You need to know the stomata. You should know that the stomata is surrounded by guard cells, which open and close it to help prevent water loss in times of high heat and dry conditions. You should know the xylem and phloem. The xylem is the tube that brings water from the roots up through the stem to the leaf, because water is a necessary ingredient in photosynthesis. And phloem is the tube that brings the sugars created in photosynthesis from the leaf to the roots and the rest of the plant to be used and stored as energy. And those are the things you should know. Those are the key ones. Emilian, can I go over in-depth explanation on how a plant gets water? How does a plant get water? Well, it has to do with see if I can find something that helps us with this. No. I'm just trying to find like root, basically plant root diagrams. So it starts with the roots. See if they have something where it shows water going into the roots to that process. I don't know if they're going to show it. I guess we can do this. So here's a root. Here's the root. This is a root hair. It's the smallest part of a root, and it's where a lot of the water will come in. So water through osmosis enters the root from the soil. So you have water in the soil. It goes into the root, right? And it's going to be transported into the root and then up the stem to the leaf, where it's used in photosynthesis. And so that process, in order for the water to come into the plant, sometimes the plant has to use active transport to pump in salts from the soil into the root so that water will follow via osmosis. So that happens sometimes. But either way, the water gets into the roots and then it goes to the leaf through the process of transpiration. So let's see if I can look at this. See if there's a good diagram that shows it in detail here that we can refer to as an image. I mean, maybe this one. This is very basic, but I think it might give us a little general hint here. So remember, on the leaf, you've got stomata, and water is evaporating out of the stomata. And because water is cohesive, it pulls on each other. So as one water molecule evaporates out of the leaf, it pulls the next one. And it pulls all the water in this huge chain, right? So the water is coming from the roots up the xylem to the leaf. And so every time one water molecule evaporates out of the leaf, it pulls on the chain of water molecules up. So it's pulling it from the roots up to the leaf. And so because water is sticking to itself and sticking to the sides of the xylem, water can actually be pulled up through this evaporation out of the leaf. So that's the idea there. Ryan M. So there's a question that requires calculation. Should we expect this tomorrow? So Ryan, no, Ryan, I will not. There's not going to actually be any calculations on tomorrow's quiz. There are going to be a couple of basic calculations on the final, though, that regard population growth and things like that. So you should do those. But on the AP test, there are sort of like dimensional analysis types of calculations and very simple calculations that you should know how to do. But no, not tomorrow. Ethan, could I go over crop yields? Crop yields? You mean in what way? Can you ask that question again? I'm not sure which way you mean to go over it. Because you're talking about the FRQ. Anjali, can I go over number 4 on the Unit 5 packet? The one about calculating net primary productivity with density. Oh, let me look that one up. Let me take a peek. I'm going to pull that up for us. The Unit 5. I just don't remember. Let me look at exactly what it was. So Anjali. Anjali, number 4 under Unit 5. Okay. I think I know which one you're talking about. I think I know which one you're talking about. It's the one that has the... Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I know what you're talking about. You're talking about this one, right? So perform the following calculation. Show all of your work. So I believe... Okay, yeah. So this one... Let me look up really quick. I think there's a typo on this. Let me look it up real quick. So I would not ask you to do these calculations on the final, just FYI, or on the quiz tomorrow. The first part of this is actually really straightforward to calculate from hectares of grassland to the amount of grass that is added each day, because if it grows 1 centimeter, if the grass grows 1 centimeter in height, all you have to do is multiply that by the area, right? And the area is 100 hectares, and just have to, and it's asking for meters squared, so you have to convert hectares to meters squared, and it turns out that 100 hectares is the same as 10,000 meters squared. And so it's 10,000 meters squared times 1. Or actually, hold on, that'd be times, this is point, so if it's 10,000 meters squared multiplied by point, what is it, 0.0, 1 centimeter is a 100th of a meter, right? So it'd be 0.001. So instead of 10,000 meters squared, it would be, just take 2 zeros away, so it'd be 100, right? 100 meters squared of grass is added each day. And then if the density grows that way, the net primary productivity, so it's how many grams per meter squared per day. And so if you have 400 kilograms per meter cubed, you basically have to convert grams, right? You have it in, you need it in grams, so you have 400 kilograms per meter cubed, converting that to grams, and I believe these are supposed to be meters squared or meters cubed. So all you're doing is converting it into grams to find it, the productivity in the volume, per volume. But again, I wouldn't ask you to do that calculation, but you should know, not for the test tomorrow, but for the final, you should understand what net primary productivity means, in the sense that it's this, net primary productivity is the amount of energy or carbon, so you could look at it in terms of energy or mass, that is created by the producers in an ecosystem or a biome or any given area. Right, so it's the amount of energy or carbon that is made available to the next level in the food chain by the producers. So the higher the primary productivity, the more, the more biodiversity and the more organisms at higher levels of a food chain can be sustained in that environment. So it's typically considered a good thing to have higher primary productivity. What's up, Haya? Hia, nice to see you. Jackie, you should need to know about mining techniques. And then, yes, you do, Jackie. You need to know mining techniques and environmental impacts. So you should know, like, some of the kinds of mining, like open pit mining, strip mining, and how that the environmental impacts that they have, like decreased biodiversity, habitat fragmentation, soil erosion, and then all the problems that associate with mining, like acid mine drainage, where you have solutions coming from abandoned mines that contain heavy metals that can get into waterways and drinking water. You should know that there's a lot of CO2 emitted during this process just because of the amount of machines that are required to do these big mining operations. There's a lot of overburden created, which then creates these big piles of material that have to be reclaimed if you're following the law. You know, in the US after 1970, we have to reclaim these mines, and so all that material has to be put back. But again, it's not perfect, so you're still damaging the soil and you're damaging the ecosystems there. And then there's, you know, other chemicals associated with those heap leach ponds and the spoil ponds and that have those chemicals that are associated with the processing of the ore. It's another issue. So here I'm just kind of explaining mining right now. I hope that was helpful. The idea is just that mining is just a way that we extract minerals from the earth, right? And so to do that, it requires a lot of energy to dig up these big pieces of ore that contain the minerals. And to dig them up, we do things like open pit mining and strip mining, where we move huge quantities of the earth, and it just destroys that habitat. It causes all sorts of issues in terms of waste products that come from the mining operation. And then you take the ore that you found and you have to purify it and process it to extract the actual mineral that you want from it, right? So you have this big chunk of ore. It's basically a rock with, let's say, copper, for example, if we're talking about a copper mineral. And you have copper in it. So you need to extract the copper from the rock. So you have to pulverize the rock. You have to treat it with chemicals, and you have to heat it up and to extract the ore, or the mineral from the rest of the ore, from the gangue is what they call it, and the spoils, and that causes a lot of chemicals and waste products that, you know, if not treated correctly, can cause environmental issues. But the whole point of mining, right, is just to get those minerals that we can then use to make things, right? So copper is very useful for making copper pipes and copper wires, and so all of that kind of, and then, you know, you have things like silicon, which is used in computer chips, which is extremely valuable. We mine for things like, you know, iron, which then we use in steel, which is how you build scaffolding in most buildings. We even mine things sort of like sand and granite for certain kinds of rocks that we use for things. Yeah. So, Akash, what unit most people have made a mistake on? Probably unit, I would say, in my experience, is Cell Bio Part 1. Cell Bio Part 1 seems to be the biggest issue. Kyle, do we need to know specific laws preventing mining issues in place? You do need to know, Kyle, for laws. I would say you should know something like the Reclamation Act, because that's a really important law in regards to mining. But as far as in general, that seems to be that the AP curriculum has gone away. They seem to have gone away from specific laws and regulations. So I'm not going to ask you any of those in particular. But I do know that they do have asked it in the past, so it's a good idea to know things. And I've mentioned a few of them in class. So Reclamation, Surface Mining and Reclamation Act is important to know. That requires companies to clean up their mining operations when they're done. Things like some regulations regarding pesticides might be good to know, like FIFRA, which is the, you know, federal, what is it? Federal Insecticide and Rodenticide, something like that. Something like that. But FIFRA is the Federal Insecticide and Rodenticide Control Act, or something like that, where pesticides are highly regulated now and can't be used if they're showing, you know, a lot of toxicity and things like that. Ethan, there are no real formulas you need to know. The only formula you should know is population, for the final, is population growth rate calculations and the doubling time, the rule of 70. So you can find those pretty quick if you look them up. Ryan, dimensional analysis is banished from your mind. Maggie, how does uplift contribute to the carbon cycle? So uplift contributes to the carbon cycle. That's how the carbon that's trapped in rocks underground, those rocks underground eventually, through slow geological processes and the movement of tectonic plates, are rise to the surface of the earth, are exposed to the atmosphere where they can be weathered, and then the carbon can be released back into the rest of the carbon cycle, like into the atmosphere or into the water. So uplift is how you get the carbon that's stuck in rocks underground up to the surface to get it back into that cycle. Calco, what is the effect of acid mine drainage? Basically, the effect is it causes acid mine drainage can cause contamination to drinking water if it gets into local waterways or seeps into reservoirs or aquifers. It also just carries with it can carry with it things like mercury, lead, other heavy metals that are toxic to wildlife, and it also has a coloration to it that can cause cloudiness in water, which inhibits plant growth, lowers the productivity of aquatic ecosystems, and can actually cause a lot of problems up the food web because of that. So it just causes a lot of issues. Yeah. And the cause, I didn't answer your, the cause is old abandoned mines. So a mine that has been abandoned fills with water if it rains, and that water, along with potentially sometimes bacteria in the mine, can cause a reaction with all the leftover spoils in the mine that were never taken out to release these heavy metals, and then the water drains out of the mine carrying with it those heavy metals, and it gets into the local aquatic systems. Of course, yeah, of course. Jackie, that's a pretty good explanation. Just want to be a little more specific with the idea of the heavy metals that can be in that runoff, things like copper, mercury, lead. So Emilian, what was in the unit second, the bio part one, was things like biomolecules, cell transport, right? Like passive transport, active transport, protein pumps, enzymes. We talked about enzymes and how they work. That was in part one. Biomolecules, enzymes, cell transport. Those are the big ones from part one. Jackie, what do we need to know for the test tomorrow in regards to agricultural techniques? You should know, I would say a really good thing to look back on is look at your jigsaw. Let me pull it up. So I would recommend, there's gonna, on the test, there's definitely, on the quiz, there's definitely gonna be some questions about these kind of things. Let me see if you, that's weird. About these kinds of things. So remember, each person or each pair was assigned a topic, and then this was actually the day that I was absent. I think I was getting my surgery or something like that. Something was going on here, or I had something to do. But and you went around and you filled in your chart based on what people presented. So you should kind of know. You should look back at this and be kind of familiar with what these things are, like ally cropping, crop rotation, tilling, terracing, aquaculture, the different kinds of irrigation. You should know these 4 types of irrigation. These are really this is an important thing to remember for the quiz tomorrow. So I would spend some time going over this. For sure. So the specific irrigation types, Ryan, are right here. You have flood irrigation, drip, and spray and furrow. And as far as like which ones are the best, drip is the best because it's the most costly. Economically it's not the best because it requires a lot of infrastructure and maintenance. But as far as water efficiency, is really, really good. And then things like flood irrigation is where you just sort of let the entire field get flooded with water. Not the best kind. It's a waste of water because a lot of it evaporates off. It also can cause things like erosion, and it can, you know, cause salinization of the soil, increase the salt concentration of the soil, which is not necessarily a good thing. And then you have like spray, which is sort of like your typical sprinkler style. Furrow irrigation is where you fill in between the rows. All of which are less effective than drip, but more economically viable, so to speak. So I just answered your question, Hia. Thanks, Maggie, for helping Emilian out with the rapid cycle. So Emilian, basically the rapid cycle is anything where carbon is moving relatively quickly between the locations. So like Maggie said, atmosphere, plants, animals, and ocean for rapid cycle. Just remember, plants, animals, atmosphere, and ocean. It can move really quickly between those four things. Long-term cycle are things that where it gets stuck or trapped for a long time. So that would be things like fossil fuels. That would be sedimentary rock. And like even things like glaciers and permafrost, so like frozen land and frozen water, carbon can get trapped in there for a long time. And even like really old trees, potentially, but actually no, never mind, scrap that. Scrap that. That's still short term. So Catherine, do all the finals have the same material because you have GAN? They all have the same material, yes, but the questions might be different. And then some of us did talk about slightly different things, so there is going to be some differences, but on the whole, I'd say it should be pretty close. Let's see. What else is on here? Kieran, what's up, Kieran? What is the difference between the different types of surface mining? So the difference is basically just the difference really is just how it's done, is sort of the technique. So for example, you have like open pit mining, which creates these big craters, right? So it's a technique, it's a style. So you would use open pit mining if there's like a deposit in a very small but deep region, and so you need to go deep down. So you would use that to access highly concentrated deposits that are in sort of a region in a three-dimensional sense, like they have depth to the deposit. A lot of times this is used for things like copper or metallic minerals, sometimes diamonds too, right? And then you have something like strip mining. Strip mining. They had strip mining in Minecraft? What is that? What is that? I don't know. What do they mean by that? That's hilarious that Minecraft has different mining techniques. That's what I had in mind. This is not strip mining. This would be considered. This is more like longwall mining, actually. But anyway, sorry, strip mining. Strip mining is something that's done more like this. See how you sort of move from left to right, or sorry, right to left on this, where you sort of go in strips. This would be more to get at like a seam, like a long, shallow seam of maybe like coal. This is oftentimes used for coal mining. Let's see if I can find a better example. Like here's another example, strip mining. And then you have mountaintop removal. Which is basically what it says, where you just basically you just kind of lop off the top of mountains and extract the ore from there. All of them are environmentally damaging. Which one's worse than the other? It's kind of a toss-up. I would argue that the ones that have the biggest surface area of damage are worse. So open pit mining, not as bad, because it's just a big deep pit that's relatively easy to fill back in, and you haven't really disturbed a huge area, because instead of going out, you're digging down. So that's not too bad. Something like mountaintop removal is pretty rough because you're just literally destroying mountains, so you're actually destroying giant habitats. And then strip mining is also pretty rough because it just kind of, it has a wider surface area. It's not as deep, but it's wider, so you're destroying more habitat. Hopefully that made sense, Kieran. Let me know if you need any other clarifying questions or have any. Kyle, what agricultural practice leads to the greatest genetic diversity? Which agricultural practice leads to the greatest genetic diversity? Probably, I mean, the most biodiversity, or you mean genetic diversity in terms of the agricultural farm itself? Would be something like polyculture, where you're planting multiple species in the same area. As far as genetic diversity within a single species, would be sort of, you'd want to be bringing in, allowing pollination to occur, right? So whatever practice would allow pollination to occur between a variety of different plants of the same species, you get a mixing of the genes that way. So you'd want to have some method of increasing pollination amongst your crops. I would say would be a good way to increase genetic diversity. Catherine, can I go over the rate of transpiration? Sure. Amy, by the way, we do not need to know, not for my class, you don't need to know the Krebs cycle. I didn't go into that level of detail. I know that Gan, Hajarian, and Chow may have. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure they may have, but I did not. So you don't need to know that for me. Let's see. Can I go over the rate of transpiration? So transpiration is when water evaporates out of a leaf, from the stomata of a leaf. And that's good for the plant because when it evaporates out, it pulls water up from the roots and it can get more water to the leaves. But the problem is if it happens too fast, then the plant loses a lot of water and it can start to wilt and die if it doesn't maintain its water inside of it. So it'll sometimes close the stomata to slow down the rate of transpiration to preserve water. And so in the context of when would it close the stomata is when it feels like it's losing too much water. When water is evaporating or transpiring out of the plant too fast. So when would it do this? It would close its stomata to slow the rate of transpiration down in any condition that increases evaporation of water. So that means in warm temperatures, transpiration rate would increase, so the stomata would close. So heat, in dry conditions, right? So dry conditions would cause more water to evaporate, so the stomata would close. And in windy conditions. It turns out that wind actually pushes moisture away from the plant, and so more water starts to evaporate out, and that increases transpiration rate, so the plant would close its stomata. Can I go over aquaculture? Sure. Basically what you need to know about aquaculture is what it is. So aquaculture is essentially a form of fish farming, essentially. So the idea is that you have an enclosed area. So let's show a picture. Let's see. So like this is an example, right? So here you've got like all these. This is like looks like a little area of potentially maybe the ocean, like a little bay or an inlet, where you have all of these different nets set up, underwater nets, and you have these fish inside of them. And so what you're raising here is fish, and you're growing fish, and they grow. You put food in there, and they eat them, and they grow, and then you harvest them and sell them. So that's aquaculture. And in the context of environmental science, we need to know that it's beneficial, environmentally beneficial, because it reduces the need to fish wild populations and cause overfishing of wild populations, which is good. Some of the downsides with aquaculture, I had a diagram in my PowerPoint that I wanted to pull up. I don't remember how I found that. Aquaculture impacts, environmental impacts. Yeah, this is the one that I used. This was a good. Why is it making it so small when I try to open it? Anyway, so this one is a good diagram of environmental impacts. So it's good because we don't have to fish as much, you know, in wild populations. But essentially, some of the downsides are that these little fishing, aquaculture, net farmy kind of things, they have a lot of fish, a high concentration of fish in a small area, and they create a lot of waste, right? So a lot of fish sewage, fish waste, is now accumulating at the bottom of that area, at the bottom of wherever that netting is. And so you get a lot of like waste products down there that can contain things like diseases and pathogens, and just an accumulation of waste from the fish that causes a lot of environmental issues. Some other problems is that sometimes fish can escape from the net and then go into the wild population and bring with them diseases, pathogens, etc. Yeah, and so another kind of thing to consider is, in this one, is that in order to protect their farm, their aquaculture, from, you know, things like aquatic mammals that would come and want to eat their fish, or from birds that would want to come and eat their fish, they do have to protect. So sometimes they do have to like not poach, but like hunt or kill animals from getting into their pens. So that's aquaculture in a nutshell. Kyle, can I go over Unit 5 section for the aligned packet? The aligned packet should be pretty good, man. I don't think there's much in there that should be off. Let me see. So let's look at Unit 5 here. Unit 5. So these ones, let's see. So basically what 75 and 70, well, 75 is trying to get at this idea of like more about like what are the important practices that we can do in agriculture that sustain good diversity, biodiversity. So those are all those things we talked about with like polyculture, ally cropping, cover crops, all that kind of stuff. Which agricultural practice makes the greatest use of GMOs, pesticides, and fertilizers? That would be monocultures, right? Because we, like giant corn farms, you grow a ton of corn and they use genetically modified corn. They apply pesticides like Roundup, and they use a lot of fertilizer to get the max bang for their buck. These ones you need to know. That was on that jigsaw. This one you should know. Pesticide Treadmill is this idea of over time. That one we talked about. That was in the PowerPoint, right? So Pesticide Treadmill you should know. It's this as farmers use pesticides more and more, the pests become more and more resistant, so they have to buy more pesticides, which costs them more money, and then they become more resistant and they spend more money, So it's this treadmill of constantly having to buy new or more pesticides to keep up with their pests that evolve resistance. So farmers end up on what we call the pesticide treadmill. Explain the broad spectrum effects of broad spectrum pesticides on beneficial species. So that would just be like when you use not specific pesticides, pesticides that have a broad range of effects on different species, it can sometimes impact unintended species. So for example, like DDT, right? That was a pesticide that worked, but it also impacted birds because of the eggshell situation, right? So the less specific a pesticide, the more likely it is to have effects on species other than the pest that you're trying to target. What are factors that contribute to the world hunger and food security? Food insecurity. That's all about like desertification, man. Like places that end up with poor soil, they can't grow food, right? So anything that causes desertification can lead to that issue. So that'd be like things like climate change, poor agricultural practices, etc. What is the major decline? What is the cause? That's overfishing. You should know these guys. I talked about that. IPM, yes. Acid mine drainage, yes. Major hazard associated with gold mining is actually acid mine drainage and cyanide. So cyanide is actually a big issue with gold mining, turns out. Cyanide byproduct. So you should know that. This one is more of a specific one. I actually didn't talk about this case study this year. But the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, right, or Antarctica. So you can kind of just think about, because mining is just harmful to the environment, we probably shouldn't mine in any wildlife refuge or place that's easily disturbed, right, and can damage ecosystems and are relatively fragile. So these are particularly fragile ecosystems that might not be able to recover from the kinds of mining operations that we might implement there. Clear cutting, yeah, you should know that. You should know that. You should know that. Travagy of the Commons, yes, 93. You should know that. You should know that. You should know that. Ecological footprint, you should know that. Carbon footprint. Carbon footprint is just the same thing as an ecological footprint, but it's how much carbon you produce. We didn't really talk about that one. But yeah, man, you should know pretty much everything in the Unit 5, for sure. I would say that's a for sure there. So a million organisms. Why do organisms do meiosis? It's because they need to reproduce, right? And they need to create unique offspring. So they do meiosis as a way to shuffle their DNA and generate cells that have a unique combination of DNA that then can be used for reproduction and create a unique organism to increase variation, because the more variety you have in the species, the more likely the species is to survive and adapt to changing conditions, because you have a bunch of people that have different genetics. So that's what meiosis is good for and useful for, and why organisms do it. If it goes wrong, that means like there might be a like one of the chromosomes might not separate correctly, and you end up with extra or too little DNA, and that can cause, you know, genetic disorders in an organism that could hurt its health, which is not a good thing. Do you know the different types of fishing? Yeah, you should kind of know some of the fishing techniques. You should know like trawling is the worst because it causes a lot of damage to the seafloor and can rip up things like coral reefs and disturb seafloor habitats. But yeah, you should know some of those. Look back at the diagram. A million. Can I go over the water cycle? Hey, Marion. Marion, look back. Watch this video and go back. I did go over it when Nerea asked. I went over the whole man-made water cycle, so look back at that, okay? I don't have time to answer it again because I'm going to be ending the stream relatively soon because it's already almost 9:30, and I'm going to probably spend not much more than another 10 or 15 minutes. Yeah, so you guys are talking about non-disjunction and meiosis now. Meiosis, yeah, it enables genetic diversity. That's good, Josita. It enables genetic diversity in offspring. That's the real key there, genetic diversity. That's the key to meiosis, and one of the biggest, or if not, it's probably the reason, right? It's the main reason why organisms do meiosis. It's to create genetic diversity in offspring. All right. So it looks like there's not that many other questions right now. Although I didn't really talk too much about non-disjunction. So non-disjunction is this idea when, you have the two chromosomes, the mom chromosome and the chromosome from dad. Normally they're supposed to separate, right? Non-disjunction would be like if they both go to the same cell, then you have way too much chromosomes in one cell, and then the other cell gets none, gets not enough. That's non-disjunction, and that causes genetic disorders and potentially can cause a non-viable offspring. Eileen, why does inbreeding cause so many issues? Because inbreeding tends to, if there's recessive genes in a family tree and then there's inbreeding, the likelihood of creating an individual that gets two recessive genes is increased. So that means when basically at a certain point, you might get an accumulation of recessive genes if there's a lot of inbreeding over time. And that could lead to genetic disorders because a lot of disorders are based off of recessive genes. And so if you have more and more recessive genes building up in that family tree as people inbreed, you can end up with individuals that get two copies, which gives them the disorder, and that's a problem. That's not good. I am a little tired, Ethan. It's 9:30. I've been up all day. I've been tired, but I'm good. I'm probably going to call it quits here in about 5 minutes because it's getting time for me to wrap it up. Not too many people on here tonight, so it seems like it's relatively slow. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to kind of wrap it up by, I guess, just go back to Marianne, your question. Marianne, you wanted to know about the water cycle. Since I have a little bit of time, I guess I'll hit on that. So the keys, remember, is that water gets to the house, right? And how it goes away from the house. So how does it get to the water? How does water get to the house? It's brought by either from a reservoir or an aquifer, and that water is transported to the house. First, it goes through a water treatment plant where the water is purified and cleaned, and then it's sent to the house where it's used. Once it's used in the house, whether for washing or the toilet or showers or whatever, it goes into the sewage system, which is the pipes connected to the house. Those pipes take the water away from the house and send it to a wastewater treatment plant where that water is cleaned, purified, all the waste is removed, and the water is then ejected into a nearby body of water, whether it's the ocean or a stream or a lake or a river, where it goes back into the natural water cycle. Make sense? Whew. All right. So it's 9:30. I think I'm going to call it a night. Although it's okay. Maggie, you're the last question. I'm going to answer your question, then I'm going to end it. Where are all the places carbon is stored? Okay, carbon can be stored in fossil fuels. It can be stored in sedimentary rock, in sediments. It can be stored in the ocean. Although that's not really stored because the ocean's part of the rapid cycle. So I guess the key thing is to think about when we say carbon is stored, we mean what are those are the locations in the long term in the geological cycle. So we're talking about fossil fuels, we're talking about sedimentary rock, we're talking about permafrost, we're talking about glaciers, places where carbon kind of gets trapped in the long term cycle. So the ones I listed are all those things that you should know. Okay? All right. Thanks, Ethan. I will. You too. Everybody else get a good night's sleep. I will see you all tomorrow for our last day of class before finals week. Thanks, Mr. Chang. You too. Have a good night, man. I hope things are going well with your police academy training, or I don't know where you're at now, but I hope things are going well with wherever you're at. Always nice to see you stop in. Appreciate it, man. Get a good night's sleep. I'll talk to everybody else another time, but I am off. All right. Bye.